I watched him feed my life's work into the shredder. Page by page, document by document, 3 months of evidence, countless sleepless nights, every single proof of his crimes, disappearing into thin metal teeth that chewed through paper like it was nothing. He didn't even look nervous. He smiled. That cold, calculated smile that told me he thought he'd won. That told me I was finished. That told me he was untouchable. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know in that moment, was that I had already made a choice. A choice that would bring his entire empire crashing down. A choice that would put him on the FBI's most wanted list. A choice that would cost him everything he'd built on lies, manipulation, and other people's suffering. My name is Rachel Morrison, and I used to be the senior compliance officer at Titanium Holdings, one of the fastest-growing investment firms in Manhattan. For 3 years, I believed I was working for a legitimate company. For 3 years, I trusted my CEO. For 3 years, I was blind to what was happening right under my nose. But when I finally opened my eyes, when I finally saw the truth, I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't just pretend I didn't know. And that decision changed everything. This is the story of how I went from a decorated corporate professional to unemployed and blacklisted in 48 hours. This is the story of how a powerful CEO thought he could destroy me and get away with it. And this is the story of how I made sure he paid for every single lie, every single crime, every single life he ruined. Before we go any further, I need you to do something for me. Smash that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to tell you, it's going to sound impossible. It's going to sound like something out of a movie, but I promise you every word of this is real. Every moment happened. And the ending is something you won't believe until you hear it. So let me take you back to when everything seemed perfect, back to when I thought I had finally made it. It was September 2019 when I first walked through the glass doors of Titanium Holdings. I remember that day like it was yesterday. The lobby was all marble and chrome, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Fifth Avenue. Everything gleamed. Everything sparkled. It felt like stepping into the future, into success, into everything I'd worked so hard to achieve. I was 32 years old, and I had just landed my dream job. Senior compliance officer at a firm that managed over $2 billion in assets. The salary was incredible, double what I'd been making at my previous company. The benefits were unbelievable, but more than that, it was the prestige. It was the validation that all those years of night school, all those certifications, all those sacrifices, they had finally paid off. My mom cried when I told her. She'd raised me alone after my dad left when I was 7. She'd worked 2 jobs to put me through college. She'd believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And now, finally, I could give back to her. I could make her proud. I could show her that every single struggle had been worth it. The CEO, David Rothschild, personally interviewed me for the position. He was 47, charming, with silver hair and the kind of confidence that made you want to impress him. He had this way of making you feel special, like you were the most important person in the room. During my interview, he told me that compliance wasn't just about following rules at Titanium Holdings. It was about integrity. It was about building trust. It was about doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. I believed every word. He told me that the previous compliance officer had left to start her own consulting firm, and they needed someone with fresh eyes, someone with strong ethics, someone who wouldn't be afraid to speak up if they saw something wrong. He said he wanted someone who would challenge him, who would keep the company honest, who would be a partner in building something that would last. I felt like I'd won the lottery. Here was a CEO who actually valued compliance, who actually cared about doing things the right way. In my previous jobs, compliance had always been treated like a necessary annoyance, something you had to do to avoid getting fined. But David made it sound noble. He made it sound important. He made me feel important. My first few months were everything I'd hoped for. The team was small but professional. There was Marcus in operations, Jennifer in client relations, Thomas in investment strategy, and about 15 other employees spread across different departments. Everyone seemed dedicated, smart, passionate about their work. The office culture was intense but positive. We worked long hours, but it felt like we were building something real. My job was to ensure that all our investment activities complied with SEC regulations, to review client accounts for any red flags, to audit our internal processes, and to file the necessary reports with regulatory agencies. It was detailed work, sometimes tedious, but I loved it. I loved the puzzle of it, the detective work of making sure every piece fit together properly. David checked in with me regularly those first few months. He'd stop by my office, ask how things were going, if I needed anything, if I felt supported. He introduced me to major clients, included me in strategy meetings, made me feel like a valued member of the leadership team, even though I wasn't officially an executive. I worked hard to prove I deserved the opportunity. I streamlined our reporting processes, created new internal audit protocols, and even spotted a few minor compliance issues that I quickly corrected before they became problems. David praised me publicly in team meetings. He gave me a bonus after my first quarter. He told me I was exactly what the company needed. I trusted him completely. My personal life was good too. I just started dating someone, a teacher named Alex who I'd met through friends. Nothing serious yet, but promising. I'd moved into a beautiful apartment in Brooklyn, something I could actually afford now. I was paying off my student loans ahead of schedule. I was sending money to my mom every month. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't stressed about finances. I wasn't anxious about the future. I felt secure. I felt successful. I felt like I'd finally figured it out. My best friend, Lisa, kept joking that I'd become one of those corporate people who talked about quarterly projections at dinner parties. She wasn't entirely wrong. I was proud of what I was doing. I believed in the company. I believed in the work. I believed in David's vision of building an investment firm that actually had integrity in an industry known for corruption. Looking back now, I can see how naive I was, how blind, how desperate to believe that I'd found something real. But at the time, everything seemed perfect. Everything seemed legitimate. Everything seemed exactly as it should be. The first crack in that perfect facade appeared in January 2020. It was small, barely noticeable. The kind of thing you could easily explain away if you wanted to. The kind of thing that, if I'm being honest with myself, I tried to ignore at first. It started with a client account that didn't make sense. I was doing my regular quarterly audit, reviewing transaction histories, checking that all the appropriate disclosures had been made, verifying that client risk profiles matched their investment strategies. Standard stuff. Routine. Boring, even. But then I noticed something odd about an account belonging to a client named Harold Chen. According to our records, Mr. Chen was 73 years old, retired, with a conservative risk tolerance. His investment profile specifically stated that he wanted low-risk, stable investments. Bonds, blue-chip stocks, dividend funds. The kind of portfolio you'd expect for someone in their 70s who was living off their savings. But his actual holdings didn't match that at all. His account was heavily invested in high-risk derivatives, speculative tech stocks, and something called alternative investment vehicles that I wasn't immediately familiar with. It was the kind of aggressive, volatile portfolio you might see for a young investor with decades to recover from potential losses, not a retiree who needed stability. I pulled up the paperwork. Everything appeared to be in order on the surface. There was a signed client agreement, risk acknowledgement forms, all the proper disclosures. But something felt off. The signatures looked, I don't know, strange, like maybe they'd been signed quickly without really reading, or was I imagining things? I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe Mr. Chen had changed his investment strategy and I just missed the updated risk profile. Maybe Thomas, our investment strategist, had discussed this with him and gotten verbal approval. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. But I couldn't shake the feeling, so I did what I was supposed to do. I sent an email to Thomas asking about the Chen account, just a casual inquiry, nothing accusatory. Just, hey, I noticed Harold Chen's portfolio seems more aggressive than his stated risk tolerance. Did we update his profile recently? Just want to make sure my records are current. Thomas responded within an hour. Good catch, Rachel. Yes, Mr. Chen decided he wanted to be more aggressive with a portion of his portfolio. We discussed it extensively, and he was comfortable with the risk. I'll send over the updated profile. The updated profile arrived in my inbox 20 minutes later. Everything looked correct. New risk tolerance, moderate to aggressive. New investment objectives, growth with some income. Signed and dated just 2 months earlier in November. I should have been satisfied. I should have filed it away and moved on. But something was still bothering me. The signature, it looked different. Compared to the original client agreement from when Mr. Chen first opened his account, the signature seemed shakier, less confident. Then again, he was 73. Handwriting changes as you age. Arthritis, vision problems, any number of things could explain a slightly different signature. I decided to do something I wasn't strictly required to do, but that felt right given my lingering concerns. I called Mr. Chen directly. Just a courtesy call, I told myself. Just to make sure he was happy with his portfolio, to see if he had any questions, to verify that he understood the risks involved. I left a voicemail. "Hello, Mr. Chen. This is Rachel Morrison from Titanium Holdings. I'm calling just to check in on your account and make sure everything is meeting your expectations. If you have a moment, I'd love to chat briefly about your recent portfolio changes. You can reach me at..." He never called back. I tried again a week later. Still no response. I mentioned it casually to Jennifer in client relations. "Have you heard from Harold Chen recently? I've been trying to reach him but haven't had any luck." Jennifer looked at her computer, clicked a few things, then said, "Oh, Mr. Chen prefers email communication. He's hard of hearing, doesn't really do phone calls. I can send him a message if you want." "That would be great," I said. "Just ask if he's satisfied with his current investment strategy and if he has any questions." The response came back the next day, forwarded from Jennifer. "Mr. Chen says he's very happy with everything and trusts our team completely to make the best decisions for his financial future." That should have been the end of it. Client confirmed he was happy, updated profile on file, everything documented, everything proper. But I couldn't let it go, because that email response, it didn't sound like something a 73-year-old retiree would write. It sounded corporate. It sounded coached. I started paying closer attention to other accounts. Not because I suspected anything specific, but because now I couldn't help but notice patterns I'd previously overlooked. 3 more elderly clients with conservative risk profiles but aggressive portfolios. 2 clients whose addresses were listed as nursing homes, but who were apparently actively trading in complex financial instruments. 1 client who was listed as deceased in the Social Security database, but whose account had made several large transactions in the past month. Each time I asked about these discrepancies, I got reasonable explanations. Family members managing accounts, powers of attorney, database errors, nothing that couldn't be explained, nothing that was technically a violation. But the pattern was there, unmistakable once you knew to look for it. I started keeping my own notes. Just a private file on my computer, nothing official yet, just observations, questions, things that didn't quite add up but that I couldn't quite prove were wrong. And that's when I made my first real mistake. I mentioned my concerns to David. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late February. David had just returned from a business trip to London, and he seemed to be in an excellent mood. He'd brought back these expensive chocolates for the office, was telling stories about meetings with international investors, talking about how Titanium Holdings was about to expand into European markets. Everyone was excited, energized by his vision. I knocked on his office door around 4 o'clock. He waved me in with that warm smile of his, gestured to the chair across from his massive oak desk. "Rachel, how's my favorite compliance officer? Please, sit. Want some tea? I brought back this amazing Earl Grey from this little shop in Covent Garden." "I'm good, thank you," I said, settling into the chair. I had my tablet with me, a few notes I'd prepared. "I wanted to run something by you, nothing major, just some patterns I've noticed that I think we should address." His expression stayed pleasant, but something shifted in his eyes. Something I didn't recognize at the time, but that I can see so clearly now when I replay this conversation in my mind. It was calculation. It was assessment. It was him deciding in that split second how to handle me. "Of course," he said smoothly. "That's exactly why you're here. What's on your mind?" I explained what I'd found. The elderly clients with aggressive portfolios, the discrepancies between stated risk tolerances and actual investments, the difficulty reaching clients directly. I was careful to frame it gently, professionally. I wasn't accusing anyone of anything. I was just raising concerns that I thought warranted a closer look. David listened intently, nodding occasionally, his face showing exactly the right amount of concern. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You know what, Rachel? This is exactly why I hired you. You have great instincts, you're thorough, you're not afraid to raise questions." I felt a flush of pride despite myself. "So you think we should look into these accounts more carefully?" "Absolutely," he said. "But let me give you some context that might ease your mind a bit. These clients you're looking at, they're part of what we call our Legacy Growth Program. It's a specialized service we offer to elderly clients who want to ensure their estates grow for their beneficiaries. Often, the clients themselves are comfortable with more conservative investments, but they've designated portions of their portfolios to be managed more aggressively for their children's or grandchildren's inheritance." He pulled up something on his computer, turned the screen toward me. It was a presentation deck about the Legacy Growth Program, complete with testimonials, performance charts, legal documentation. It looked completely legitimate. "The reason you're having trouble reaching some of these clients directly," he continued, "is because many of them have designated representatives. Adult children, financial advisors, attorneys. People who are managing the day-to-day decisions while the elderly client retains ownership. It's actually quite common in wealth management for older populations." It made sense. It all made perfect sense. And the fact that David was being so transparent, so helpful, so understanding of my concerns, it made me feel like maybe I had been overthinking things. "That does clarify a lot," I admitted. "I just want to make sure we have all the proper documentation for these arrangements. Powers of attorney, beneficiary designations, that sort of thing." "Absolutely," David said. "And you know what? I'm going to have Thomas pull together a complete file on the Legacy Growth Program for you. Every client, every document, every piece of paperwork. You can review it all, make sure everything is buttoned up the way it should be. Sound good?" "That sounds perfect," I said, relief washing over me. "Thank you for understanding. I know I'm probably being overly cautious, but—" "No," he interrupted, his voice firm but kind. "Never apologize for being thorough. That's your job. That's what I need from you. The day you stop asking questions is the day we have a problem. You keep doing exactly what you're doing, okay?" I left his office feeling reassured, feeling like I had the best boss in the world, feeling like maybe I'd found something rare in the corporate world, a leader who actually valued integrity over profit. The file Thomas sent me 2 days later was extensive. Hundreds of pages of documentation for the Legacy Growth Program. Client agreements, legal authorizations, regulatory filings, performance reports. It would take me weeks to go through it all properly. I should have started immediately, but I got distracted by other work, by a new regulatory requirement that needed implementation, by 100 small tasks that seemed more urgent. The Legacy Growth file sat in my digital inbox, waiting for me to find time to dive into it. And then, on March 13th, 2020, everything changed. Not just for me, but for the entire world. COVID-19 was declared a pandemic. New York City went into lockdown. Suddenly, we were all working from home, adapting to Zoom meetings, trying to maintain business operations during unprecedented chaos. The stock market crashed. Clients were panicking. Our entire team was working around the clock trying to manage the crisis, to reassure investors, to navigate regulations that were changing daily. The Legacy Growth file got pushed further and further down my priority list. But even in the chaos, even in the fear and uncertainty that gripped everyone in those early pandemic days, I kept noticing things. Small things. Things that didn't make sense. Like how Titanium Holdings seemed completely unaffected by the market crash. While other investment firms were hemorrhaging money, While the news showed nothing but red numbers and devastating losses, our accounts showed consistent growth. Impossible growth. Like how David kept announcing new major clients even as the economy was collapsing. Who was investing large sums of money in the middle of a global pandemic? Who was opening new accounts when everyone else was pulling money out of the market? Like how certain client accounts showed transactions on weekends, late at night, at times when no legitimate trading could occur. I started digging deeper, not in an organized way at first, just following threads during my sleepless nights, clicking through databases when I should have been sleeping, cross-referencing information that nagged at me. I discovered that several of our largest clients didn't exist. Their addresses were vacant lots. Their phone numbers were disconnected. Their business licenses had expired years ago or had never existed at all. I discovered that the returns we were reporting to clients didn't match the actual market movements of the assets we claimed to be holding. The numbers were fabricated, beautiful fiction designed to keep money flowing in. I discovered that new client deposits weren't being invested at all. They were being used to pay returns to older clients. Classic Ponzi scheme structure, hidden behind layers of complex financial instruments and corporate jargon. And the Legacy Growth Program? It was the centerpiece of the whole operation. Elderly clients whose mental capacity was declining, whose families weren't paying close attention, whose assets could be moved and manipulated without anyone noticing. Some of these people didn't even know they had accounts with us. Some of them were dead, their identities stolen, their names used to create phantom accounts that existed only on paper. The scope of it was staggering. We weren't talking about a few discrepancies or aggressive accounting. We were talking about systematic fraud. We were talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. We were talking about crimes that would send people to federal prison for decades. And I had evidence of all of it sitting in my digital files, waiting to be discovered. I didn't sleep for 3 days after I realized what I was looking at. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think about anything else. I kept hopping I was wrong, kept looking for alternative explanations, kept trying to find some way that all of this could be legitimate. But there was no alternative explanation. There was only the truth, cold and clear and devastating. Titanium Holdings was a criminal enterprise. David Rothschild was a con artist, and I had been helping him unknowingly for almost a year and a half. Every report I'd filed with the SEC, signed with my name and my professional credentials, was based on fraudulent data. Every client I'd spoken to, reassuring them that their investments were safe and compliant, had been a lie. Every day I'd walked into that office, proud of my work, confident in my integrity, I'd been part of a machine that was destroying people's lives. The guilt was overwhelming. How had I not seen it sooner? How had I been so blind? Yes, David had been clever. Yes, the documentation had been sophisticated. Yes, I'd been busy and trusting and naive. But wasn't it my job to catch this? Wasn't this exactly what a compliance officer was supposed to prevent? I thought about walking away, just quitting, deleting everything, pretending I'd never seen any of it. I could say I was leaving because of the pandemic, because of stress, because I wanted to pursue other opportunities. No one would question it. I could disappear, start over somewhere else, forget any of this ever happened. But then I thought about Harold Chen, about all those elderly people whose life savings were being stolen while they sat in nursing homes, confused and vulnerable. About the legitimate clients who thought their retirement funds were safely invested when really their money was gone, evaporated into David's personal accounts and fake balance sheets. I thought about my mom, about how she'd worked herself to exhaustion to give me a better life, about how she'd taught me that doing the right thing mattered more than doing the easy thing, about how disappointed she would be if I walked away from this. I couldn't just quit. I couldn't just pretend I didn't know. I had to do something. So I started building a case, systematically, carefully, secretly. Every day I'd log into work, attend my Zoom meetings, file my reports, act like everything was normal. And then, late at night, I'd compile evidence. I created a separate folder on my personal laptop, not connected to the company network. I screenshot everything. I downloaded transaction records, client files, internal emails, regulatory filings. I cross-referenced our reported holdings with actual market data. I traced money flows through the maze of corporate accounts. I documented every false statement David had made in investor presentations, every fabricated return, every phantom client, every forged signature, every fake transaction. I taught myself things I'd never needed to know before: how to verify business registrations in multiple states, how to search property records, how to identify shell corporations, how to trace money through offshore accounts. The internet became my classroom, and desperation made me a quick study. I created a timeline showing exactly when the fraud had started. It went back further than I'd initially thought, at least 5 years before I'd even been hired. The previous compliance officer, the one who'd supposedly left to start her own firm, I found her obituary. She died in a car accident 3 weeks after leaving Titanium Holdings. Single vehicle crash, late at night, ruled accidental. I felt cold when I read that. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just a tragic coincidence. But I started being very, very careful. I varied my routes when I went out. I didn't tell anyone what I was working on. I kept my evidence in multiple places, backed up on encrypted drives, hidden in cloud accounts under fake names. It took me almost 3 months to build the complete file. 3 months of double-checking every fact, verifying every claim, making sure my case was airtight. Because I knew that when I came forward with this, I'd get exactly one chance. If the evidence wasn't absolutely solid, David would destroy me. He'd claim I was disgruntled, mistaken, mentally unstable. He'd use his charm and his lawyers and his reputation to discredit everything I said. So it had to be perfect. It had to be undeniable. It had to be so comprehensive that no one could dismiss it or explain it away. By June 2020, I had it. 347 pages of documented evidence. Transaction records proving funds were being misappropriated. Client statements showing false returns. Email communications revealing David's knowledge and direction of the fraudulent activity. Forensic analysis of signatures showing forgeries. Audio recordings from company meetings where he discussed creative accounting and managing the narrative. I had everything, every piece of the puzzle, every thread of the conspiracy, everything I needed to bring down Titanium Holdings and put David Rothschild behind bars. But I still had one problem. I didn't know who to trust. If I went to the wrong person, if I reported this through the wrong channels, David would find out before any real investigation could begin. He'd destroy evidence, move money offshore, disappear into some country without an extradition treaty. Or worse, he'd come after me, the way I suspected he might have come after my predecessor. I needed to be strategic. I needed to be smart. I needed to make one move that would protect me and guarantee that justice would be served. I decided to go directly to our external auditors first, to create a paper trail that couldn't be erased. I'd request a meeting, present my evidence, and force them to act. They'd be legally obligated to investigate and report to the SEC. Even if David tried to interfere, the process would already be in motion. I scheduled a meeting with our audit firm for July 15th. I didn't tell anyone at Titanium Holdings. I used my personal email, my personal phone. I said I had concerns about certain accounting practices and needed to discuss them confidentially with a senior partner. They agreed immediately. They probably thought it was routine, some minor question about how we were categorizing assets or calculating risk exposure. They had no idea what I was about to drop in their laps. I prepared for that meeting like I was preparing for trial. I organized my evidence into a clear narrative. I created an executive summary that laid out the fraud in simple terms. I made multiple copies of everything, stored them in different locations, prepared to hand over a complete evidence package. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. I kept rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd present the information, how I'd answer their inevitable questions. I felt terrified and exhilarated at the same time. By this time tomorrow, everything would be different. The truth would be out. The investigation would begin. David's empire would start to crumble. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. I woke up on July 15th to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, all from work, all marked urgent. My heart was pounding as I scrolled through them. Something had happened. Something big. The messages were frantic, confused, demanding to know where I was and why I wasn't online. I called Jennifer, who picked up on the first ring. "Rachel, oh my God, finally. Where have you been? David has been trying to reach you for hours." I was sleeping, my phone was on silent. "What's going on?" "The SEC showed up this morning," she said, her voice shaking. "Like, showed up. Federal agents, investigators, the whole thing. They're in the office right now going through everything. David wants all senior staff on Zoom immediately. He says there's been some kind of mistake, some misunderstanding, but we all need to be available to cooperate with the investigation." The room spun. The SEC was already there, but I hadn't said anything yet. I hadn't met with the auditors yet. How could they possibly know? Unless someone else had reported it. Unless someone else had found the same evidence I had. Unless... "Rachel, you still there?" "Yeah," I managed. "Yes, I'm here. I'll log on right now." My mind was racing as I opened my laptop. This could actually be good news. If the SEC was already investigating, then my meeting with the auditors would just add to their case. I wouldn't be the lone whistleblower David could target. I'd be one of multiple sources, protected by an investigation already in progress. I logged into Zoom. David's face appeared on screen and he looked perfect. Calm, concerned, but not worried. Like a man who had nothing to hide and was eager to help authorities clear up a simple misunderstanding. "Rachel, good morning," he said warmly. "Thanks for joining us. I know this is concerning, but I want everyone to stay calm. The SEC has received some kind of anonymous tip about our accounting practices. It's completely baseless, obviously, but we're going to cooperate fully with their investigation. Transparency is our best friend here." Anonymous tip. My blood ran cold. The only people who could have sent an anonymous tip were people who knew about the fraud, and if it wasn't me. "Now," David continued, "the investigators are going to want to speak with each of you individually. That's normal procedure. I need you all to be completely honest with them. Answer their questions truthfully. But also remember that you're not lawyers or accountants. If they ask you about complex financial structures or regulatory interpretations that are outside your area of expertise, it's okay to say you don't know. Don't speculate. Don't guess. Just stick to what you personally know and have personally done." He was coaching us. Right there on Zoom, with federal investigators in the building, he was coaching us on how to talk to the SEC without actually saying the words, "Don't tell them anything." "Rachel," he said, and my stomach dropped. "I'm going to need you to do something for me. I know you keep meticulous compliance files. The investigators are going to want to see all of our internal compliance documentation. Can you compile everything and have it ready for them? Transaction reviews, audit reports, client verification records, everything." "Of course," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have everything organized already." "Excellent," he said, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Why don't you come into the office this afternoon? I know we've been remote, but for something this important, I think it's better if we're all physically present. Say 2 o'clock. It wasn't a request. It was a command. And something about the way he was looking at me through the camera, something about the tone of his voice, sent ice through my veins. He knew, somehow, he knew that I knew. Maybe he'd been monitoring my computer activity. Maybe he'd noticed my unusual file downloads. Maybe someone had seen me researching things I shouldn't have been researching. However he'd figured it out, he knew. And he was calling me into the office to deal with me. I thought about refusing, about saying I didn't feel safe traveling during the pandemic, about making some excuse. But if I refused, it would confirm his suspicions. It would tell him I was the threat he needed to eliminate. 2 o'clock works, I heard myself say. I'll be there. Wonderful, David said. I really appreciate your dedication, Rachel. You've always been one of my most trusted team members. The meeting ended. I sat staring at my blank screen, my mind spinning through possibilities, trying to figure out what to do. My meeting with the auditors was scheduled for 4 o'clock. If I went to the office at 2, I'd have time to deal with whatever David wanted and still make my meeting. I'd still be able to hand over my evidence. The SEC was already investigating, so even if David suspected me, what could he really do? He couldn't hurt me with federal agents in the building. He couldn't destroy evidence while they were watching. I decided to go, but I took precautions. I emailed my evidence file to 3 different people, my best friend Lisa, my mom, and a lawyer I'd consulted about employment issues years ago. The email said, "If anything happens to me, please give this file to the FBI." I felt ridiculous typing it, like I was being melodramatic, like I was in some kind of spy movie, but I sent it anyway. I made copies of everything on 2 USB drives. I put one in my purse. I hid the other in my apartment, in a place no one would think to look. I called Lisa. "I need you to do me a favor. If you don't hear from me by 6 o'clock tonight, call the police. Tell them I went to a meeting at Titanium Holdings and I'm not responding." "Rachel, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "Probably nothing," I lied. "Just being paranoid, but promise me okay." She promised. I got dressed carefully, professional but not formal. I wanted to look normal, like this was just another day, just another meeting. I checked my purse 3 times to make sure the USB drive was there. I practiced what I'd say to David, how I'd act, how I'd pretend everything was fine. And then I took the subway to Manhattan, watching the city pass by outside the windows, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. The office looked different when I walked in at 2 o'clock. Maybe it was the knowledge of what was really happening there, or maybe it was the presence of 3 SEC investigators moving through the space with boxes and laptops, cataloging evidence. The gleaming chrome and marble that had once seemed sophisticated now felt cold and sterile. Like a beautiful mask over something rotten. David's assistant, a young woman named Michelle who'd always been friendly to me, looked terrified when I arrived. "He's waiting for you in his office," she whispered. "Rachel, what's happening? Are we all going to lose our jobs?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But whatever happens, make sure you tell the investigators the truth, okay? Don't let anyone pressure you to lie." She nodded, her eyes wide, and I walked toward David's office with my heart hammering against my ribs. He was standing by his window when I entered, looking out over 5th Avenue with his hands clasped behind his back. The afternoon sun backlit him, making it hard to see his expression. He didn't turn around when I closed the door. "Beautiful city, isn't it?" he said conversationally. "I grew up in Newark, you know, poor neighborhood, struggling family. I used to take the train into Manhattan just to walk around, to see all this wealth and success and power. I promised myself that one day I'd be part of it, that one day I'd have an office with a view like this." "David, you wanted to see the compliance files." He turned then, and the warmth that usually characterized his expressions was completely gone. What remained was cold assessment, the look of a predator deciding how to handle prey. "How long have you known?" he asked simply. My breath caught. For a split second, I considered playing dumb, pretending I didn't know what he meant. But something in his eyes told me that denying it would only make things worse. "A few months," I said quietly. "Since February, really, though I didn't understand the full scope until recently." He nodded slowly, as if I'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. "And what exactly do you think you know, Rachel?" "That Titanium Holdings is a Ponzi scheme, that you've been defrauding investors for at least 5 years, that the Legacy Growth Program is a cover for stealing from elderly clients, that almost everything about this company is a lie." I expected anger. I expected threats. What I didn't expect was for him to smile, a sad, almost wistful expression. "You really are good at your job," he said. "I knew you were smart when I hired you, but I thought you'd be like everyone else. Too eager to believe, too invested in your own success to look too carefully. That's the secret, you know. People don't want to discover fraud. They want to believe everything is fine because acknowledging the truth means acknowledging their own complicity." "I'm not complicit," I said, my voice harder than I expected. "I didn't know." "Didn't you, though?" He moved closer, his voice gentle, almost therapeutic. "You saw the red flags in January. You noticed the discrepancies. But when I gave you a reasonable explanation, you accepted it, because you wanted to accept it, Because you wanted to keep your impressive salary and your prestigious title and your perfect little life. The words hit like physical blows because there was truth in them. I had seen the signs. I had chosen to believe his lies because believing them was easier than facing the alternative. That doesn't change what you've done, I said. Those people trusted you with their life savings. Harold Chen, all those elderly clients, the legitimate investors who thought. Those people are sheep, David interrupted, his voice suddenly harsh. The world is divided into wolves and sheep, Rachel. The wolves take what they want. The sheep get sheared. That's how it's always been. That's how it will always be. I'm just better at it than most. The SEC is already here, I said. Whatever you're planning to do to me, it won't stop what's coming. They're going to find everything. The SEC, he laughed, actually laughed. Is that what you think this is? Rachel, I've dealt with the SEC before. I have lawyers who specialize in making regulatory problems disappear. I have accountants who can make numbers dance whatever way we need them to. This investigation will go nowhere. In 6 months, they'll file some minor complaint, we'll pay a small fine, and everything will continue exactly as it has been. Not if there's evidence, I said. Not if someone provides them with proof of what you've really been doing. His eyes narrowed. Someone like you mean? The air in the room felt thick, dangerous. I became acutely aware of how alone I was, how the door was closed, how no one would hear me if I called for help over the normal office sounds. I have a meeting at 4 o'clock, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. People know where I am if I don't show up. Sit down, Rachel. It wasn't a request. There was something in his voice that made my legs move before my brain could process, lowering me into the chair across from his desk. He walked to his credenza and pulled out a bottle of scotch, poured 2 glasses. He set one in front of me and kept one for himself. You're not going to your 4 o'clock meeting, he said calmly, because you're going to give me every piece of evidence you've collected, and then you're going to resign from Titanium Holdings, effective immediately. And if I don't, then I'll destroy you, he said it matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. I'll present evidence to the SEC that you were the architect of the fraud, that you manipulated client accounts, forged documents, and created the entire scheme. I'll show them emails you sent, reports you filed, decisions you made, all of it pointing to you as the mastermind. That's insane. No one would believe. Wouldn't they? He pulled out a folder, slid it across the desk to me. Take a look. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside were documents with my signature, my name, my employee ID number, transaction authorizations for fraudulent trades, client agreements with forged signatures that I had supposedly verified, emails that appeared to be from me discussing how to hide certain activities from auditors. They were fake. They had to be fake, but they looked real. They looked absolutely, completely real. You see, Rachel, I've been in this game a long time. I didn't build all of this without insurance, without protection. Every employee who's ever worked here, especially anyone in a position like yours, I have a complete file of evidence showing their involvement. If I go down, I don't go down alone. I take everyone with me. I felt sick. The scotch sat untouched in front of me while the room seemed to tilt and spin. So here's what's going to happen, David continued, his voice calm and businesslike now. You're going to write a resignation letter citing personal health concerns related to the pandemic. You're going to hand over every file, every document, every piece of evidence you've collected. And then you're going to disappear from my life and never speak about Titanium Holdings to anyone ever. In exchange, I won't destroy your life. I won't put you in federal prison. I'll even give you 6-month severance, which is more than generous considering. And if I refuse, then I'll make sure you spend the next 20 years in a cell. I'll make sure everyone you love loses everything. I'll make sure your name becomes synonymous with fraud and betrayal. Your mother, who you send money to every month, she'll lose her house when you can't help her anymore and when the lawsuits against you drain whatever assets she has. Your friend Lisa, she'll be called as a witness, investigated as a potential accomplice. Your whole life will become a nightmare. I stared at him, this man I'd admired, this man I'd trusted, and saw him clearly for the first time. He wasn't charming or visionary or inspiring. He was a a predator in expensive clothes with a corner office view. I need your answer, Rachel. Every instinct I had screamed at me to fight, to refuse, to tell him to go straight to hell. But the evidence in that folder was terrifying. If he could fabricate documents that convincing, if he really had the lawyers and connections he claimed, could I win against him? Would anyone believe me over him? I thought about my mom, about Lisa, about spending decades in prison for crimes I didn't commit, about losing everything I'd worked for because I'd tried to do the right thing. Where are the files? David asked, his voice gentle now like he knew he'd won. On my laptop, at home. Then we'll go get them, right now. You and me. We'll take a ride to your apartment, you'll give me your laptop and any copies you've made, and then we'll come back here and you can clean out your desk. Simple, easy, and then this nightmare ends for both of us. I should have said no. I should have screamed for the SEC investigators. I should have done literally anything except what I did next. I nodded. We took his car, a black Mercedes that probably cost more than my mom's house. He drove casually, like we were just two colleagues running an errand together. He even made small talk about the empty streets, about how strange the city looked during the pandemic, about his hopes that things would return to normal soon. I sat in the passenger seat, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do. The USB drive was in my purse. I could feel its weight, a small piece of plastic and metal that contained everything I needed to bring him down. But if I gave it to him, if I gave him my laptop, he'd destroy it all. The evidence would disappear. The fraud would continue. More people would lose their savings. And I'd have to live with the knowledge that I'd had the power to stop him, and I'd chosen my own safety instead. We pulled up outside my apartment building in Brooklyn. I'll come up with you, David said, just to make sure we get everything. Of course he would. He wasn't going to give me a chance to hide anything or send files to someone else. He was going to watch me hand over every piece of evidence, make sure it was all destroyed, make sure I couldn't change my mind later. We rode the elevator to my fourth-floor apartment in silence. My hands fumbled with my keys as I unlocked the door. My small studio apartment, which had seemed so perfect when I'd moved in, now felt like a trap. Nice place, David said, looking around. Cozy, where's your laptop? On my desk. I gestured to the small workspace I'd set up by the window. He walked over to it, opened the laptop, waited for it to boot up. Password. I gave it to him. What else could I do? He typed it in, started scrolling through my files. I watched him open the folder labeled Compliance Review Confidential. Watched him see the hundreds of documents I'd compiled. Watched his jaw tighten as he realized just how comprehensive my evidence was. This is everything, he asked. Yes. No copies, no backups, no files sent to anyone else. This was the moment where I could tell the truth, could admit that I'd already sent everything to multiple people, that it was too late for him to stop it. The moment where I could fight back. Instead, I lied. That's everything. He pulled a thumb drive from his pocket, copied the entire folder onto it. Then he opened his bag and took out something that made my blood run cold. A portable paper shredder, small enough to travel with, the kind executives use for sensitive documents on the go. But he wasn't going to shred paper. He was going to shred my hard drive. The physical evidence, he said. You printed some of this out, didn't you? Where is it? I'd printed the most important documents as backup, stored them in a locked file box in my closet. I retrieved it silently, handed it over. David opened the box, flipped through the pages, nodded. And then, right there in my apartment, he began feeding my evidence into the shredder. Page by page, document by document, transaction records showing fraudulent trades, client statements showing fabricated returns, email printouts revealing his knowledge of the scheme, forensic analysis of forged signatures, 3 months of work, hundreds of hours of investigation, every piece of proof I'd collected. Gone. The sound of the shredder was deafening in my small apartment. A mechanical whine followed by the crunch of paper being torn apart. David didn't look angry or worried. He looked satisfied, like a man checking items off a to-do list. I wanted to stop him. I wanted to grab the papers from his hands, call the police, do something. But I stood frozen, paralyzed by fear and shock and the surreal horror of watching my entire case being destroyed. When the last page disappeared into the shredder, he removed my laptop's hard drive with a screwdriver he'd brought, dropped it into the machine. The grinding sound was different for the metal and plastic, harsher, more violent. Then he unplugged the shredder, packed it back into his bag along with the thumb drive containing my files. "The USB drive in your purse," he said quietly. "Give it to me." My heart stopped. "I don't." "Rachel, don't insult my intelligence. Give me the drive." With shaking hands, I retrieved it from my purse, placed it in his palm. He pocketed it without comment. "Good," he said. "Now, the resignation letter. Write it now on your phone, email it to HR and copy me. Health concerns due to COVID-19, effective immediately, grateful for the opportunity, all the usual corporate nonsense." I did what he said. What choice did I have? My fingers typed the words mechanically, professionally lying about personal health issues and difficult decisions and appreciation for the experience. I hit send and heard the whoosh of the email disappearing into cyberspace. "Excellent," David said. "Now I'm going to say this once and I want you to listen very carefully. You never worked on any investigation. You never found any evidence. You resigned because you were stressed and anxious about the pandemic. If the SEC contacts you, you tell them you have no knowledge of any wrongdoing at Titanium Holdings. If anyone asks about your time there, you say it was a good experience but you needed to prioritize your health. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Because if you don't, if you decide to play hero, I will bury you. I will bury everyone you care about, and no one will believe you anyway because there's no evidence. It's all gone. It's your word against mine, and I have a lot more credibility than a former employee who quit during a mental health crisis." He walked to my door, paused with his hand on the knob. "For what it's worth, Rachel, I really did think you were excellent at your job. In another life, we could have done great things together, but you made your choice. Now live with it." Then he was gone. I heard his footsteps receding down the hallway, heard the elevator ding, heard the building door close behind him. And I stood alone in my apartment, surrounded by the empty file box and the faint smell of destroyed paper, trying to process what had just happened. I had lost everything. The next 72 hours were the darkest of my life. I didn't leave my apartment. I barely ate. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight, couldn't do anything but replay the confrontation over and over in my mind, cataloging every mistake I'd made, every moment where I could have chosen differently. I should have screamed when we were in his office with the SEC investigators right outside. I should have refused to get in his car. I should have called the police when he showed up at my apartment. I should have fought back, resisted, done literally anything except meekly hand over the evidence that could have stopped him. But I hadn't. I'd been scared and intimidated and I'd folded like paper, just like he knew I would. The emails started coming the next day. First from HR, confirming my resignation and outlining my severance package. Then from former colleagues, expressing surprise and concern, wishing me well. Then, most devastating of all, from the auditing firm, asking if I still wanted to keep our 4 o'clock meeting or if my resignation changed things. I stared at that email for an hour, cursor blinking in the reply field. I could still tell them. I could explain everything that had happened, describe the evidence I'd collected even if I no longer had it. But without proof, what was the point? It would be my word against David's fabricated documents showing my involvement. I'd be painting a target on my back for nothing. I deleted the email without responding. Lisa called me dozens of times. I didn't answer. My mom called, worried because I hadn't checked in like I usually did. I sent her a text saying everything was fine, I'd just been busy, I'd call her soon. Another lie to add to the pile. On the third day, I finally forced myself to look at the news. The SEC investigation into Titanium Holdings was barely mentioned, just a small article in the business section about routine regulatory review. No charges filed. No evidence of fraud discovered. No mention of David Rothschild except to quote him saying the firm was cooperating fully, and looked forward to the investigation confirming their ethical business practices. He'd been right. He was going to get away with it. The SEC would find nothing without my evidence. The investigation would quietly close, and David would continue running his scheme, stealing from vulnerable people, destroying lives to fund his expensive cars and corner office views. And I had let it happen. I had chosen my own safety over justice. I had chosen silence over truth. I had become exactly what he'd said I was, a sheep too afraid to fight the wolves. The self-loathing was overwhelming. I understood now why victims of powerful people so often stayed silent. It wasn't weakness or complicity or indifference. It was the crushing realization that the system was rigged, that fighting back meant sacrificing everything, that speaking truth to power usually just meant being destroyed by power. I thought about the previous compliance officer, the one who died in a car accident after leaving the company. Had she discovered what I'd discovered? Had David threatened her too? Had she chosen to fight back, and had that choice cost her everything? The paranoia crept in. Every car that drove past my building could be someone David sent to watch me. Every unknown number that called could be a threat. Every sound in the hallway could be danger. I started keeping my curtains closed, stopped going out except for necessary groceries, jumped at every unexpected noise. I was falling apart. It was Lisa who finally forced her way into my apartment on day 4. She showed up with food and wine and a determination not to be ignored. When I didn't answer her knocks, she called my landlord claiming to be my sister worried about my safety, convinced him to let her in with his master key. She found me on my couch in the same clothes I'd been wearing for 2 days, surrounded by empty coffee cups and the remains of whatever food I'd managed to choke down. Jesus, Rachel. She set down her bags and came to sit next to me, pulling me into a hug. What happened? And don't tell me nothing. You send me a cryptic email about something happening to you, you quit your job, you disappear off the face of the earth. Talk to me. So I did. I told her everything. The fraud, the evidence, the confrontation, the shredding. All of it poured out in a flood of words and tears and anger and shame. She listened without interrupting, her expression moving from shock to horror to fury. When I finally finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You sent me that file. The one in the email, the insurance policy. Do you still have it?" My heart stopped. The email. The one I'd sent the morning of my meeting, just in case something happened to me. I'd completely forgotten about it in the trauma of everything that had happened since. "I deleted it," I whispered. "From my sent folder. I was so scared he'd check my email, that he'd find it and know I'd sent copies out. I deleted it as soon as I got home that night." "But I didn't delete it from my inbox," Lisa said slowly. "Rachel, I still have it. The whole file, all the evidence. It's sitting in my email right now." The world tilted. Everything I thought was lost wasn't. David had been so thorough, so careful to destroy every piece of physical evidence. But he'd never thought to ask about emails I'd sent before he confronted me. He'd assumed the only copies were the ones I'd made after I realized he was suspicious. "I have it too," I said, my mind racing now. "On my personal email. I sent it to 3 people, remember? You, my mom, that lawyer, if you still have it." "Then they probably do too," Lisa finished. "Rachel, you still have the evidence, all of it." Hope flared in my chest for the first time in days. Maybe it wasn't over. Maybe I could still fight back. Maybe I hadn't lost after all. But then reality crashed back in. It doesn't matter. Even with the evidence, if I come forward, he'll use those fake documents to implicate me. He'll destroy my life. Then we need to be smarter than him, Lisa interrupted. We need to figure out how to use this evidence in a way that protects you, in a way that he can't see coming. How? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. You're not doing this alone anymore, okay? You have help now. We're going to bring this bastard down. It took us 2 weeks to formulate the plan. 2 weeks of research, strategizing, consulting with lawyers under hypothetical pretenses, learning everything we could about how to be effective whistleblowers without becoming targets. The key, we realized, was that we couldn't just hand over evidence to the SEC. David had been right about that much. He had expensive lawyers who could tie up a regulatory investigation for years, who could muddy the waters, who could make the evidence seem questionable or ambiguous. We needed something bigger, something that couldn't be controlled or managed or delayed. We needed public attention. We needed pressure that even David's lawyers and connections couldn't deflect. But we also needed to protect me. If my name was attached to the whistleblowing, David would immediately present his fabricated evidence showing my involvement. Even if I was eventually cleared, the accusations alone would destroy me. The legal fees would bankrupt me. The stress would break me. So we needed someone else to be the public face of the disclosure. Someone credible, someone David couldn't intimidate, someone with the platform to make this story impossible to ignore. That's when Lisa suggested her cousin Marcus. Not the Marcus from Titanium Holdings. This was a different Marcus, an investigative journalist who worked for a major newspaper. He'd won awards for exposing corporate fraud. He had sources in federal law enforcement. He had the credibility and protection that I lacked. Lisa reached out to him carefully, not telling him specifics at first, just asking if he'd be interested in a story about investment fraud. He was immediately interested. Financial crime was exactly his beat. We set up a meeting at a coffee shop in Queens, far from Manhattan, far from anywhere David might have eyes. I brought my laptop with the recovered email files. I brought printouts I'd made from the evidence Lisa had forwarded back to me. I brought a timeline, documentation, everything Marcus would need to verify the story. He listened for 3 hours, asked pointed questions, took notes, reviewed documents, and at the end he looked at me with something like awe. "This is massive," he said quietly. "This is Madoff-level fraud. Hundreds of millions, maybe more, elderly victims, forged documents, systematic deception. This is the kind of story that wins Pulitzers." "Can you write it without using my name?" I asked. "Can you protect me as a source?" "I can do better than that," he said. "I can make you invisible. I'll attribute everything to documents obtained by this reporter and sources with knowledge of the company's operations. I'll verify everything independently so it doesn't rely on your credibility. And when I'm ready to publish, I'll notify the FBI at the same time. Not the SEC, the FBI. Because this isn't just regulatory violation. This is wire fraud, identity theft, maybe even elder abuse. Federal crimes that federal prosecutors will want to pursue." "How long will it take?" Lisa asked. "To do it right? To make it bulletproof? 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. I need to verify clients, confirm transactions, get independent expert analysis. If I rush this and get anything wrong, his lawyers will use those errors to discredit the whole story. So I need to be thorough. I need to be perfect." "And you think this will work?" I asked, afraid to hope. "You think this will actually bring him down?" Marcus looked at me seriously. "Rachel, what you documented here, it's incredibly comprehensive. It's exactly what prosecutors need. Once this story breaks, once the public knows about it, there's no way the FBI doesn't act. There's no way David Rothschild doesn't end up in handcuffs. I can't promise you the timeline or the exact outcome, but I can promise you this. His life as he knows it is over. You've already destroyed him. He just doesn't know it yet." For the first time since watching my evidence disappear into that shredder, I felt something other than despair. I felt powerful. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I hadn't lost after all. I'd just been playing a longer game. David had thought he'd beaten me. He'd thought destroying my files meant destroying my evidence. He'd thought intimidating me into silence meant I'd stay silent forever. He'd underestimated me, and that mistake was going to cost him everything. Marcus called me on a Tuesday morning in late September. I'd been waiting for weeks, checking my phone obsessively, wondering if he'd found something wrong with my evidence. Wondering if the story would ever actually happen. When his name appeared on my screen, my heart jumped into my throat. "It's ready," he said without preamble. "The article publishes tomorrow morning, front page of the business section, and there's going to be a digital exclusive that goes live at 6 a.m. I've already notified the FBI. They're extremely interested. Rachel, you need to prepare yourself. Once this goes public, everything changes." What do you mean, prepare myself? I mean the story is going to be huge. It's going to be everywhere. Cable news, social media, other newspapers picking it up. David Rothschild is about to become the most hated man in America, and Titanium Holdings is about to be exposed as one of the biggest fraud schemes in recent history. The FBI will move fast once they see the public attention, and at some point, they're going to want to talk to you. My stomach twisted. But you didn't use my name. You said I'd be protected. You are protected as a source, Marcus assured me. But the FBI isn't stupid. They're going to figure out that someone internal provided these documents. They're going to want to interview everyone who worked at Titanium Holdings, and that includes you. But here's the thing, by the time they talk to you, they'll already have enough evidence to move forward. You won't be their only source. You'll be one of many witnesses. And if David tries to present those fabricated documents implicating you, the FBI will see right through them. They'll have the real timeline, the real evidence. They'll know he's trying to frame you. Okay, I said, trying to steady my breathing. Okay, what do I need to do? For now, nothing. Stay home tomorrow. Don't answer calls from numbers you don't recognize. Don't talk to any reporters except me. And if the FBI contacts you, cooperate fully. Tell them everything. They're the good guys here, Rachel. They're going to want to help you, not hurt you. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining what would happen when the story broke, how David would react, whether he'd know it was me, whether he'd come after me despite Marcus's protection, whether his lawyers would find some way to make this all go away like he'd promised they could. Lisa came over and stayed with me, understanding without me having to ask that I needed someone there. We sat up watching late-night TV, not really paying attention, just waiting for morning to come. At exactly 6 a.m., my phone started buzzing with news alerts. Lisa grabbed her laptop and pulled up the newspaper's website. And there it was, the headline in bold letters. Manhattan investment firm, accused of massive fraud scheme, targeting elderly victims. Below it, Marcus's byline. Below that, a photo of David Rothschild looking confident and successful at some charity gala. The irony of that image paired with the accusations was almost poetic. We read the article together. Marcus had done exactly what he'd promised. Every detail was there. The Ponzi scheme structure, the fabricated returns, the forged documents, the elderly victims whose identities had been stolen. But it was all attributed to internal documents reviewed by this reporter and sources familiar with the company's operations. My name appeared nowhere. The article included reactions from financial experts, calling it a horrific betrayal of trust. It included statements from investigators confirming they were looking into the allegations. It included attempts to reach David for comment, to which his lawyer had provided a boilerplate denial of all wrongdoing. But what made it devastating, what made it impossible to ignore, were the specifics. Marcus had tracked down 3 of the elderly victims whose identities had been used. He'd interviewed family members who had no idea their loved ones' names had been attached to investment accounts. He'd found one woman, 81 years old, living in a nursing home with advanced dementia, who apparently had an account with Titanium Holdings showing aggressive cryptocurrency investments. Her daughter, interviewed in the article, was horrified and furious. "This is perfect," Lisa breathed. "This is absolutely perfect. He can't make this go away." She was right. By noon, the story was everywhere. Every major news outlet had picked it up. Cable news shows were running segments about it. Financial analysts were being interviewed about the scope of the fraud. Social media was exploding with outrage. The name David Rothschild was trending on Twitter, and none of it was positive. And then, at 2:30 p.m., I got a call from an unknown number with a Washington, D.C. area code. I almost didn't answer, remembering Marcus's advice, but something made me pick up. "Is this Rachel Morrison?" A professional female voice, calm and official. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Special Agent Jennifer Lawson with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I'm calling regarding Titanium Holdings. We'd like to schedule a time to speak with you about your employment there. Would you be available for an interview later this week?" My hands were shaking. Am I in trouble? "Not at all, Ms. Morrison. We're conducting interviews with all former employees as part of our investigation. This is strictly voluntary, but your cooperation would be very helpful. You're not a target of the investigation. We simply believe you may have information relevant to our case." Relief flooded through me. "I'll cooperate fully. When would you like to meet?" We scheduled an interview for Friday at a federal building in downtown Manhattan. Agent Lawson was professional and polite, making it clear this was a witness interview, not an interrogation. When I hung up, I immediately called Marcus and told him. "That's good," he said. "That's very good. It means they're moving fast, building their case. And the fact that they specifically said you're not a target means they don't buy whatever story David might try to tell about you." Over the next few days, I watched David's world crumble from the safety of my apartment. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion, each floor pancaking onto the one below until nothing remained but rubble. Day 1, the SEC announced they were expanding their investigation into Titanium Holdings in light of the new allegations. David's lawyer released a statement calling the accusations baseless and defamatory, promising legal action against the newspaper. But his denials sounded hollow, desperate. Day 2, 3 major clients announced they were pulling their investments and filing complaints with regulators. The company's website went dark. The office phones were disconnected. Employees started posting on LinkedIn about suddenly being unemployed, expressing shock and betrayal. Day 3, the FBI raided Titanium Holdings offices. News cameras captured agents carrying out boxes of documents, hard drives, computers. David was photographed being escorted from the building, not in handcuffs yet, but clearly being questioned. He looked furious and frightened in equal measure, his usual polished confidence completely gone. Day 4, more victims came forward. Marcus wrote a follow-up article featuring interviews with 5 more elderly individuals or their families who had been defrauded. The total estimated fraud amount climbed from hundreds of millions to potentially over $1 billion. Day 5, federal prosecutors announced they were convening a grand jury to consider criminal charges against David Rothschild and other executives at Titanium Holdings. The charges being considered included wire fraud, securities fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and elder abuse. I watched it all unfold with a mixture of satisfaction, relief, and lingering fear. Satisfaction that David was finally facing consequences. Relief that the victims were being acknowledged, that the fraud was being stopped. But also fear that somehow, some way, he'd find a way to drag me down with him. My interview with the FBI on Friday lasted almost 4 hours. Special Agent Lawson was joined by her partner, Special Agent Marcus Chen, no relation to Harold Chen, I confirmed. They were professional, thorough, and surprisingly kind. They asked me about my employment at Titanium Holdings, about what I'd discovered, and about my interactions with David and other executives. I told them everything, holding nothing back. About the red flags I'd noticed in January, about David's explanations, about building my evidence file, about the confrontation in his office. "Did you feel threatened during that confrontation?" Agent Lawson asked. "Yes, very threatened. He showed me fabricated documents that made it look like I was involved in the fraud. He said if I didn't resign and stay quiet, he'd use them to destroy me." "Do you still have copies of the evidence you collected?" "I do. I sent files to several people before David destroyed my physical copies. I can provide you with everything." Agent Chen leaned forward. "Ms. Morrison, I want to be very clear with you. You are not in any legal jeopardy here. We've reviewed the timeline of events, and it's obvious that you discovered the fraud and attempted to report it. The documents Mr. Rothschild showed you supposedly implicating you, we've already found them. They're crudely fabricated, and they don't match any of the actual evidence we've recovered. No prosecutor is going to take them seriously." The relief was so intense I almost cried. "So he can't use them against me?" "If he tries, it'll just add obstruction of justice and evidence tampering to his charges," Agent Lawson said with a slight smile. "Mr. Rothschild has made a lot of mistakes, but threatening a potential witness and fabricating evidence to intimidate her into silence might be his biggest one. That shows consciousness of guilt. That helps our case. They asked if I'd be willing to provide the evidence files I'd recovered to potentially testify before a grand jury, to cooperate with the prosecution as it moved forward. I agreed to everything. "What happens now?" I asked as the interview was winding down. "Now we build the case," Agent Chen said. "We're executing search warrants, interviewing witnesses, tracing money flows, recovering documents. It's going to take months, maybe longer. These complex fraud cases always do. But I can tell you that the evidence we've already found, combined with what you've provided, is extremely compelling. Mr. Rothschild is going to face federal charges. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And the victims, the elderly people he stole from. We're working on asset recovery," Agent Lawson said. "We've already frozen his personal accounts and the company's accounts. We're tracing money to offshore holdings, real estate, luxury assets. We can't promise we'll recover everything, but we're going to do our best to make sure victims get as much back as possible." I left the federal building feeling lighter than I had in months. The FBI believed me. They were taking this seriously. They were going to make sure David faced justice. Over the weekend, I finally called my mom. I'd been avoiding her calls, not knowing how to explain what had happened, not wanting to worry her. But she deserved to know the truth. I told her everything, just like I'd told Lisa and the FBI. About the fraud, the confrontation, the evidence, the article. She listened quietly, and when I finished, I braced myself for disappointment or anger that I'd gotten involved in something so dangerous. Instead, she said, "I'm proud of you, baby." "What, Mom, I lost my job. I almost got charged with federal crimes. You saw something wrong and you tried to fix it," she interrupted. "Even when it was dangerous, even when it cost you. You did the right thing. That's all I ever wanted for you. Not success or money or prestige. Just for you to be the kind of person who does the right thing when it matters." I cried then, really cried, for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Not tears of fear or shame, but tears of relief and release. "It's not over yet," I said when I could speak again. "The trial, everything that comes next, it's going to be hard." "Then I'll be there with you," she said simply. "Whatever you need, I'm here." Marcus called me the following week with an update. The grand jury indicted David Rothschild this morning. 15 federal charges including wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. He was arrested at his home about an hour ago. Bail hearing is tomorrow. Will they let him out on bail? Probably, given that he's not considered a flight risk yet, but the conditions will be strict. Passport surrendered, ankle monitor, the works. And Rachel, the prosecutors want to talk to you about being a witness at trial. You okay with that? I thought about Harold Chen, about the woman with dementia who supposedly invested in cryptocurrency, about all the victims whose life savings had been stolen, about my predecessor who died in a suspicious accident, about every person David had hurt in his climb to success. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'll testify. I'll tell everyone exactly what he did." Because that's what this had always been about, really. Not revenge, though I won't pretend the satisfaction wasn't real, but justice. Making sure the truth came out, making sure the victims were heard, making sure that powerful people couldn't just destroy lives and walk away unscathed. David Rothschild had thought he could intimidate me into silence. He'd thought destroying my evidence meant destroying my ability to fight back. He'd thought his money and lawyers and connections would protect him from consequences. He'd been wrong about all of it. And now, watching the news coverage of his arrest, watching him do a perp walk in handcuffs while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, I realized something important. I hadn't lost when he shredded my files. I'd just been forced to find another way to win. Sometimes the direct path isn't the right path. Sometimes you have to be patient, be strategic, be willing to look defeated while you're actually repositioning for the final strike. David had taught me to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. He just never imagined I'd use that lesson against him.